Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So in this video, we're going to be putting this back into the Escalade. I wanted to have a little bit more done on it before it went back in, just because the fenders stick ahead pretty far and it's kind of down in there, so it would be easier to do. But we're going to have to throw it in how it is. We did get our heater hoses, or our heater core lines done. I drilled and tapped a air bleed in the top of this. It's just 1/8 pipe. We got this one here. This one done. We have our oil drain in the block down here. For the drain on the turbo, we're going to use a number 10 AN line, and for the feed for the turbo, which is just in the top of the oil filter housing, we're going to be using a number 4 line. Now, I would have wanted to have the turbo on here, mounted up before it goes back in, but we ran into some problems. The fittings to adapt from this to the AN and on the top of the turbo to the AN, I'm still waiting for the fittings. And also, this is a T3 manifold. The turbocharger is a T25. Now this adapter was on here, like so. Now, the T25 flange, there's two different flanges. There's this one, which is rectangular, and then there's this one, which the hole is an oval. The footprint on the flanges are the same, so the bolts and everything line up, but I don't know if you can look down in there. You can see there is quite the restriction on the edges of the flange. So you're going to get a lot of exhaust reversion. So what that is it's going to hit that flange and then kind of bounce back. And you're also going to get a lot of pressure. So it's probably just going to blow this gasket out. So we're going to get the proper flange for here, and port match them basically to the turbocharger. Now this might work. There's probably not a ton of pressure in there, so this might work all right. But I've had issues before where we've had a T4 flange trying to adapt it to a T3 and just blowing the gasket out all the time, just because there's so much pressure there and too much exhaust coming out. So we're going to get this off the stand, put the bell housing adapter back on, flywheel, and get her back in the engine, or get her back in the engine compartment. So now we're going to put the adapter on with some green Loctite on the bolts. I'm not going to use, no, not green. So we're going to put the back on with some blue Loctite on the bolts instead of red, because it doesn't really need to be super strong, so you don't really need red. The blue will work just fine. And here's our adapter. I've already cleaned this, the mating surface off. There's still some paint on it, but that doesn't really matter. So we've got all those in. Now we got to torque them. The torque spec is 44 foot-pounds. There we go. So here we go, we got her down in again. I'm gonna leave the engine mount bolts loose just so we can slide it around to line the tranny and everything up. I went in all right, a little tight up at the top there, but yeah, she's back in. Gotta put the valve covers on and then tip the front of the engine up so it'll angle back so the converter and everything will line up better. Alright, so we got our transmission up in there, everything's flush, bolted down. I'm not going to film putting the rest of the bell housing bolts in, I'm just going to go and do it because it's pretty dark up there and pretty self-explanatory on how to put the bolts in. So I'm gonna get that done. Then yeah, we gotta tighten the converter up. I'll show you the proper fitment of the converter, how they should be when you, or before you tighten stuff up. All right guys, we got our torque converter, or our, not torque converter, got our transmission all bolted up. All up in there good. Let's see. This is kind of tricky. You can see our converter. So you can see our converter, which is here, flex plate here. The way you can tell if it's seated properly and has proper clearance is that with the bell housing bolted up, you still should be able to turn the converter. Our converter will spin. It would not do that before. Before it was binding up against the flex plate. So now we have our converter able to spin. Our holes line up. It's all good in there now. We got our T-case all bolted up. Fuel tank is bolted in. We still have to run our fuel lines from the tank to the engine, and also the filler neck has to be done, which is going to be that fitting there going up to that fitting there. So she should flow nice and free. We're also gonna have to plumb this vent tube up there beside it into the filler neck somehow, so it'll properly vent as you're filling, or else you'll get it foaming up and coming out the fill pipe. But we do have a problem up here. Kind of a setback. So we got the diff here. We ground more of that out and smoothed it up to try to get the pan to clear. But as you can see right here, the pan does not clear still. So we still have a couple of inches before the top of the diff, which is that aluminum piece, can bolt up to the hole that is right there. So we're gonna have to take the oil pan off again and kind of notch out the side that the diff is on, which shouldn't really be a problem because the oil pickup is on the other side of the pan, so we shouldn't run into any issues with that. But other than that, the pan's in, or not the pan, the engine's sitting down in, transmission's on, torque converter's bolted up properly. Yeah, drive shaft can go in. We got to make the fuel lines for it, and a couple other things, and then we can start putting everything on top back together. We also have our AN fittings and everything ordered for the turbocharger lines, but they're not in yet. So we're gonna get as far as we can on that before we actually need the lines. So let's get this pan out. We gotta get the front diff back out and then notch it and re-weld it, I guess. All right, so after a few days of some fabrication, we got our pan welded up. It's been sitting here for probably 3 hours full of Varsol. Now, since Varsol is a cleaner, it's oily, it will leach into anywhere that is leaking. So this is a good way to test whether we have some leaks. You can use gas, you can use Varsol, you can use, what's the stuff called? Acetone. Anything that will leach into the cracks, if there is any. So here's a nice side view of the pan, all dry from the back there. So you can see how much we had to take out in order for it to clear the diff. So now we're gonna rocker guard it all up and then get it on the truck. And you notice here we had to notch here because the brace for the dipstick tube was coming in to hit. It was gonna hit the bend in the pan itself that we had to make. So we had to notch that so it'll sit in, everything's gonna bolt up good. We got the converter bolts all done. So all that's left to do to get the pan back on is paint it and silicone her in, put the diff in, and then away we go with getting on to the rest of the install. All right, guys. So the engine is finally mounted up in there, all good, ready to go. So let me show you some problem areas we ran into and how we came up with a solution for that. So the first thing was the engine was sitting pretty crooked. So what we did was in that engine mount right there, we made up 2 shims and put it in there to straighten the engine out. Those shims brought the engine so it was more level and so it sits better in the engine bay. This oil pan, now this oil pan here, we had to notch it out pretty good. So basically cut the whole side of it out, and then we still ran into a problem with the front diff clearing, so we had to notch up and around right there as well and come over to this side and go up so we could clear those bolts you see there. Also, since we relocated the the pickup tube in the pan, we had to weld in a bung for the drain. So where the drain was, that was the best place for it. If we went back here at the back, it would have interfered with the pickup tube. So we had to notch this cross member out like so, weld a piece in there so it's all sturdy again, and then put these JIC fittings in and bring it down to the bottom here. So we got our engine mounted in, transmission bolted up, cross member welded up again and put back in, and also the front diff is in. And what else? Yeah, the pan is all done and good to go. So now we got to hook up the transmission, hook up the turbocharger, hook up all that stuff, but we are still waiting for our our AN fittings for the turbo lines. COVID's kind of messed all that stuff up quite a bit. There's no stock on them, so we've been waiting a little while for that stuff. But yeah, that will be on the next installment of the video for hooking up the transmission, doing all your wiring and stuff like that. This is just some things we ran into when trying to fit the engine around the front diff and everything like that. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on Instagram. And we will catch you on the next one.